Oh, hey everybody, how you doing? Just give me a moment. Today we are going to be talking about Kamusari, an attack that we have seen exactly 2 times in the One Piece world, which means I can finally talk about it. You can't judge an attack based off of it just being used once. You gotta wait at least until 2 times it was used, and then I could probably make I don't know, you could look down there and see how long this video is. 25 minutes? I'm gonna say 26 minutes, 42 seconds. That's what I'm betting on. But first, before we get to that, I need to adjust the lighting in here. This looks pretty cool, but we are talking about Shanks today. So what color would represent Shanks the best? All right, Shanks. Let's see. He's got a scar. He's got one arm. He's got a sword. He has a boat that has Force in the name. Force, okay, the Force from Star Wars, Luke Skywalker, lightsaber, Luke Skywalker's lightsaber is blue, so let's go with that. Yeah, blue, there we go, now we're cooking, there we are, alright, there we go, the perfect backdrop for a Shanks video, alright, there it is. Okay, first of all, let's take just a moment to appreciate how cool that attack name is, okay? You know, it's not every day you get a really just simple anime attack like that. Actually, let me ask you a question. Do you prefer longer names for anime attacks? You know, like the one that comes to mind immediately is that attack that Uehara used against Aizen. It was like Hado number 91. It was like Senju Koten Taiho. It's like heaven-shaking sky cannon, blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay, those are really cool. Those are really cool. But every once in a while, it's nice just to have an attack name that's just like, you know, like Raiga or Kamusari or just something really simple that just, you know, it just cuts right to it. It's just like, hey man, I'm an insanely powerful anime character. I don't need some really long sesquipedalian name for an attack, you know, multiple syllables or whatever. No, just, you know, 2 kanji, Kamusari, that's all I need, all right? So the first time we saw this technique used was in the flashback with Oden, and we actually saw it used by none other than the king of the pirates himself, Goldie Roger. And in fact, this was the first named attack we ever saw Roger utilize, and I believe it was the first time we ever saw Roger fighting, like, at all. Because I think up until now, you don't know how many times we've seen Roger in this story where he's just on the execution platform. Like 90% of Roger showing up before the Oden flashback, which wasn't very much already in the story, mind you, was a flashback which involved him on the execution platform about to die. Okay, that was pretty much all we saw of Roger. So seeing Roger actually walking around, not even in his prime. Remember, during that Oden flashback when Oden charged at Roger and he used Kamusari for the first time against him, that was a year or so before he found the One Piece and another year before he died, all right? So Roger was already very ill at the time that he clashed with Oden and clashed with Whitebeard there. Granted, he had Crocus around to sort of abate the symptoms, you know, and provide, you know, not a cure, but like, you know, just some kind of medicine for it. So, you know, he was still really strong. If Crocus wasn't around, Roger might have been weaker even, but still, the fact was that Roger was not at the top of his game during that flashback, and we still saw how ridiculously powerful he was. So basically, this is great. We have Oden on Whitebeard's crew at this point, and Roger had heard about him. He had heard the legend of this samurai that Whitebeard now had on his crew, and Roger really wanted to meet him, and so they land on an island. The Whitebeard crew is there. The Roger pirates are already hanging out on that island. I think they beat up some Marines there, and they're just chilling. And then, of course, Oden being Oden immediately just jumps off the Moby Dick, and he's just like, I gotta see what's here, and he just starts running off into the island, and Roger immediately senses him with his observation, and he's just like, oh, not even his observation. Oden's mighty footsteps through the jungle were enough to be like Roger, like, oh, yes, this tickles me mustache, mateys. I'll be off, you know? So he even tells Rayleigh and Scopper Gabon, like, hey guys, you two are my strongest men. I don't want you to get hurt. Let me take care of it, right, guys? And Rayleigh is just like, you just want him to yourself. And then Roger's like, yes. Also, we really get to see that Roger is pretty much just a grown-up version of Luffy in this regard, you know, and like the personality's very similar, which is very funny. So anyway, Roger just charges right at Oden. Oden's there. He's got both of his swords out. He's got Enma and Ame no Habakiri charged up with armament hockey. This is Oden we're talking talking about here, okay? And if you want to say Roger is not at the top of his game at this moment, Oden is. Oden is pretty young at this point. Oden is kind of at the peak, and he doesn't have some crazy anime illness to worry about, all right? So Oden is kind of at his peak right now, and Roger isn't. So just keep that in mind for what's about to happen, all right? So Roger takes out his mighty sword, his saber, Ace, which may or may not be the inspiration for Ace later. That would be a little weird if it wasn't, but hey, who knows? It might not be. I don't know. Maybe it's also possible that, like, Roger's master or Roger's, like, father, grandfather, somebody else, maybe was named Ace, and that's why Roger named the sword Ace, and that's the overall inspiration for Ace's name. Not that he just named Ace after his sword, or Rouge named him after Roger's. I will name you after my husband's sword. That's a true manly name. Anyway, he takes out Ace, and with one hand, one arm, he just casually Kamusari! And then he just hits Oden dead on with this. Oden blocks it with his swords, but then boom, he just gets sent flying back through like 7 trees, hits the 8th one, drops down. Oden coughs up blood. He's really shook a little bit, but this is Oden, so he just kind of begins to charge back toward Roger. If anything, Oden is just more perturbed that he now has to run like another 2 miles back to where he was. But yeah, this is a technique that Roger, not in his prime, sent Oden flying with extraordinarily minimal effort, okay? And Oden was ready for a fight. Keep that in mind, too. He wasn't just casually walking into the island like, hello there, fellow pirates, and then Roger sends him flying. No, he's charging headlong. Oden's going fast. He's going hard. He's got his swords out. He's got armament hockey charged up. He's ready for a fight. He's prepared. His senses are honed to a razor's edge. And Roger just comes out and just, ha-ha, matey! And that's all it was. That's all it took, man. Okay. So what is Kamusari? Well, let's break it down a little bit here. Like I said, it only has 2 kanji. It's a pretty simple name. It's a very powerful name. It has the kanji for God, or kami. Keep in mind, kami, yes, it is they are the deities in the Shinto religion, but also it could regard the ancestors, like the ancient ancestors that are also the progenitors to famous clans that exist in Japan today. A lot of this stuff goes back to some ancient Japanese texts, the oldest of which being the Kojiki, which is an account on ancient affairs in Japan, where it's basically around around the 600s AD, some court clerks and scribes actually sat down and wrote this account of okay, this is the official history of Japan, where they're pretty much just laying it all out okay, so the sun god Amaterasu and then Susanoo and all those kind of stories are in the Kojiki of this is the origin. This is Jimmu, who was the first emperor, who was, historically probably not real, but in terms of, mythology and in the Kojiki, Jimmu was the first emperor. So it's an accounting of ancient affairs and the deities that created Japan, okay? And so a lot of this is where that comes from. So there's deities that could be regarded as gods or kami that are the progenitors of famous clans in Japan. That's the origin of it, okay? So that's the first kanji for kami or god, and then the next kanji simply means to avoid. So literally the technique's name is just godly avoidance. So that's an interesting way to look at it, depending on what we're going to get to in a second, but there's a double meaning behind the word. So right away, it just seems like you're trying to avoid a god. Or it's just oh man, I can't let Thor know I stole his hammer. I gotta hide from him. You know what I mean? But no, that's not what it means really. It really does mean you're killing a god, or the death of a kami, or the death of a god. In the Viz translation, it's divine departure, which I guess works enough. But in the Kojiki, that is a term that would be used for the death of a kami. I guess not necessarily murdering a kami, but in the terms of a death of a kami. So I mean, if you just really want to break this down to the most edgy, badass way of this technique's name, you can just have Roger step out and be like, God Slayer, matey! I mean, that works. It really works. Is it an exact translation? Not really, but it works, okay? Yeah. So, that's what we got here. Godly avoidance, divine departure, death of a kami, God Slayer, whatever you want to do. It's a befitting name for an attack for the king of the pirates is basically what we're saying here, okay? Now, the attack itself, Roger basically pumps like a crap load of armament and Conqueror's Hockey into Ace, and then he swings it, and I mean, like, as a Bleach fan, it's not lost on me. It essentially looks like a Bankai Tensuzangetsu Getsuga Tensho, alright? It looks like Ichigo's, when he goes into his Tensuzangetsu form and he uses the black Getsuga Tensho, that is basically what it looks like. It's even, I think, outlined. It's like a black crescent blade attack outlined in, like, you know, red, purple kind of color, you know, with the Conqueror's Hockey lightning coming off of it. It looks very similar to a Getsuga Tensho. So I'm just gonna, you know, use that as a reference point, okay? And when he uses this technique against Oden, Roger was very lackadaisical. He was very just like kind of playing around. You could tell that Roger was not aiming to kill Oden with that attack, okay? Then, as soon as Oden got sent flying, Whitebeard jumps out, and then he begins to bring down his Murakumo Giri on top of Roger, and then Roger now uses, I don't know if he uses Kamusari again, but he takes, as taking a lesson from Kenpachi Zaraki, he uses two hands, takes his two hands, charges up his sword with even more Conqueror's Hockey, even more armament, and then boom, him and Whitebeard clash in the middle of this island. And you could see the difference between those two interactions right there. When Roger struck Oden, you know, it was just, you know, Kamusari and just got sent flying away. When Roger was bracing for impact against Whitebeard, okay, and his weapon, Murakumo Giri, you know, Roger has to, like, two hands, plant his feet firmly on the ground. The ground itself kind of begins to, like, rock and shake apart. The skies begin to tremble. And then Roger, like, he rears back with Ace. And then he brings it back, like, whoa! You know, like, and then boom, they clash there, and they don't even really connect because of just the outpouring of Conqueror's Hockey, like, intercepting their blows, okay? It's like magnetic forces pushing them back, okay? So, yeah, you can tell there were two very, very different, you know, levels of that there, okay? So, that was Roger using the technique. Very, very impressive. Now, in the most recent One Piece chapter, chapter 1079, we see the second use of this technique, now used by Shanks, who is, of course, a former member of Roger's crew. He was the apprentice pirate aboard the Oro Jackson, and also really was Roger's, like, adoptive son, if we're being, like, you know, I mean, that really was the case. They found Shanks in a treasure chest at God Valley, and Roger basically adopted him. I bet Roger and Rayleigh were great parents. You know, that just, like, it's funny to me to this day to picture them, like, changing a diaper or whatever. Matey, Shiki's attacking us off the port bow, and Shanks has got some, oh, he had an accident. It's okay, we'll fix that later. We'll fight against Shiki. And then, you know, Roger's, like, literally fighting against Shiki while changing Shanks' diaper. He's like, oh, matey, this is not what I expected when I headed out to sea. This is truly a great adventure. Okay, anyway, so... Shanks having this technique makes perfect sense. I did a live stream yesterday. I did like a post-chapter discussion, and somebody asked, like, how did Shanks go about learning this technique exactly? And I think it was because, you know, by the time the Roger Pirates separated and Roger turned himself in and was executed, Shanks was only like 14, 15 years old. So I guess the implication was like, oh, well, maybe he didn't learn that technique right then and there. But I think he did. I think it's just he practiced over the years with it. I think after witnessing, yeah, I think Shanks at age like 14 could probably have used Kamusari, but it would have been really weak. But he saw his captain, his father figure, use it over and over and over again. It like might have been his like opening technique. That might have been like the equivalent of Zoro's like Onigiri or Luffy's Gamu Gamu no pistol. It's like that was Roger's staple attack that he always opened up with, right? Okay, just to kind of test his opponent's mettle. And so, you know, Roger probably taught it to Shanks. And then Shanks is like, okay, that's like, here's the move. Here's how you do it. You know, you have to add conquerors and armament to it to really add that extra oomph. And so Shanks wasn't great at first, but, you know, over the years, he trained and trained and trained. And at the end of the day, it's really not that much of a complicated technique, honestly. It's really just, you take a sword, so you have to be a sword fighter to use it, and then you just add a lot of armament and conquerors to it, so you have to have conquerors as another prerequisite, and you also have to be able to combine conquerors and armament with your weapon, which is something else that's kind of tricky. It's not super easy to do that. But it's not something overly complex. It's not like you have to be like, Vegapunk to understand the complexities of this move. It's like something that probably most swordsmen on their own will probably arrive at. Like, Mihawk should be able to use Kamusari. Now, he might not call it Kamusari, but he would be able to do something pretty similar. As with anybody else that uses, like, a bladed weapon, Whitebeard probably would have, like, that technique that Whitebeard used is basically Kamusari, just not named Kamusari. He takes Morokumo Giri, adds armament, adds conquerors, swings it down, big shockwave attack. Essentially, it's the same deal. You're just naming it that different things. So, that's the case there with Shanks. Now, question, is Shanks stronger than Roger? I could see this honestly from two different perspectives. I could see this from the perspective of Roger's the king of the pirates, he's objectively the strongest, or you could look at it from, hey, Shanks was the student of Roger, student surpasses the master kind of situation. Like, by the end of One Piece, Zoro might very well pass up Mihawk. Now, that's kind of a tall order, given what we know now, because Shanks is super strong, and we saw, him with Kid chapter, and the fact that Mihawk and Shanks would duel all the time, that's another big just indication for Mihawk there. See, that's the thing you got to look at, not just how strong Shanks and Roger are for using Kamusari, but like think of how strong Oden was to like tank that with really no major issues, even though Roger was just kind of messing around, and also how strong Mihawk's got to be for, dueling with Shanks on that kind of level of caliber, even though they haven't dueled in a while, right? So, yeah. I don't know. Going with the themes of One Piece and whatnot, like, the idea of Shanks passing up Roger, like, eclipsing Roger's power, especially in Roger's later years when he was very ill, like, I would be okay with that. I don't think it needs to be, like, established that, like, Roger, yes, for right now, in all purposes in the story, Roger was the strongest pirate that ever lived, but that doesn't mean he has to hold that title for all time. Records are meant to be broken, after all, and if Shanks would be the one to eventually pass up his captain, that makes sense. And then maybe when Luffy gets older, he can surpass Shanks. And so it's like passing the torch down to the next generation, stronger and stronger and stronger. I would be perfectly fine with that, right? But at any rate, the ways that they used Kamusari are very different. Whereas Roger was just kind of messing around with Oden, only one arm and everything. And Shanks was very serious with Eustace. Still only using one arm. I don't know why Shanks didn't use both arms. Can you imagine if Shanks would use two arms with Griffin, Kamusari? Oh my god! What's wrong with you, Shanks? Why would you only use one arm with that sword? Anyway, he was out to kill Kid, considering what happened, and he was about to sink Shanks's entire fleet in the span of like less than a minute. So Shanks was like, I was gonna do this the correct way. I was gonna maybe, duel him one-on-one. I didn't really want to do this, but he decided to go off like just with no patience whatsoever and just start blasting all of my crew. So yeah, I'm just gonna finish him off in one attack, and that was really the vibe that you got exuding off of Griffin during that exchange, where he shows up, slices apart the damned punk railgun, hits Kid with like, honestly, I went back and looked, and there really doesn't seem to be that much injury on, Eustace's body itself. It doesn't look like, it's not like, his intestines are spilling out. Like, there's this giant gash, like, right on the front of his chest, like, blood's pouring out everywhere. It seems like the railgun absorbed most of that impact. Like I said in the review, if Kid did not have that railgun out, he would be just bisected. He would just be cut in half from that attack. But, he gets hit by the shockwave of that alone, and then he coughs up blood, and he instantly gets knocked out, and he's on the... So he definitely took damage. He took a lot of damage, but I think it might be a lot, like, internally damage. It doesn't look like, there's a giant slice on his stomach, like he got, like, almost completely cut in half or anything like that, like Kid's spinal cord is the only thing holding him together right now. Like, there's nothing like that, but it's still pretty bad. Killer also went to go jump in, and he got knocked out as well. So Shanks, with one arm, by himself, with a single attack, took down two of the members of the worst generation. And once again, like, Shanks was serious, but you really don't get the impression Shanks really exerted himself from that. You don't, like, at the end of the chapter, you don't see Shanks, like, panting or, like, covered in sweat of just, like, I had to bust out my strongest technique against Eustace and kill her. No, you know, Shanks is just, like, slice and then end of chapter there. So, yeah, two very different setups for that attack when used by Roger and used by, you know, Shanks. I feel like if Roger was really angry at Oden and if he attacked him with that same kind of determination that Shanks did against Kid, Oden probably wouldn't have been getting back up as quickly as he was. And that's saying something considering that's Kozuki Oden. All right, but really, after getting hit with Roger's Kamusari, Oden just got knocked through a bunch of trees and he just immediately was like, man, that sucks. And then immediately starts running back. So his head was bleeding a little bit. He was a little rattled, but that was pretty much it. If Roger was really, really serial, might have went a different way, okay? So, yeah, I'm a sucker for that, personally. I really love it when it's like, okay, the student then uses the technique of the master. Roger's not around anymore. We're not going to see him using Kamusari in the present story, but we could see Shanks utilizing it, you know what I mean? Oh, man, so... Let's see here. How long did I say this video was going to be? 26 minutes, 42 seconds. We're up to 21 minutes right now. I think I have to edit a few of these out, but nothing too crazy. There was another angle to this I wanted to discuss. Oh, yes, of course. Okay, let's look at that name again, all right? Godly avoidance, divine departure, death of a kami, all right? So, a lot of god symbolism here going on. Okay, well, who in One Piece is considered a god? Or what group in One Piece likes to think of themselves on that godly level? Yeah, that would be the Tenryubito. Also, in the singular, you could look at Eneru. So that would actually be really funny if, like, after this chapter, after Kid has been just completely decimated, Shanks is there in just a really foul mood, and he's just like, ugh. I didn't want to do this today. And then all of a sudden, Eneru descends. He's just like, humans, I have arrived! And then Shanks just looks up at him and just like, who's this dipshit? You know, who's this guy now? What? Okay, fine. You know, you want some? I'm in a bad mood today, all right? And then, you know, Shanks just takes out Eneru in a single slash. But no. Of course, we're referring to the Tenryubito. We're talking about the Celestial Dragons. Also notable that Shanks was found in a treasure chest at God Valley where the Celestial Dragons live. This has led to a popular theory in the One Piece fanbase that Shanks himself is a descendant from a Celestial Dragon. This also makes sense that he was able to gain an audience with the Gorosei at Marijois, which is highly, highly unusual. Granted, Shanks is one of the more amenable and respectful members of the Emperors. Kaido or Big Mom or Blackbeard could never get a meeting with the Gorosei ever. Like, they would just never agree to that, okay? Like, allowing Kaido into Marijois, that just would not happen. But Shanks, you could look at it from the perspective of, like, okay, this is Red Hair Shanks. He has a code. He has honor. By the way, I think I'm going to be making a whole video just about the pirate code, because I think that's very important to discuss moving on. But, like, you could look at it from that perspective. Like, Shanks is not going to cause any trouble. He knows better not to do that. We can actually talk to him. But also, if he was a child that was the son of a Celestial Dragon family at God Valley, and then Roger found him or whatever, and, you know, took him away or something, and then they, you know, the Gorosei knew about this later, like, oh, that's the son of Saint, you know, actually, oh yeah, that's another thing. We know Shanks's last name, and that blows my mind, and I saw the movie twice, but I don't remember, is because the Gorosei assumed that Uta was the child of Shanks, like the biological daughter of Shanks. Now, she isn't. She was the adoptive daughter. Shanks also found her in a treasure chest because that's just a thing in One Piece. But they don't know that. So they assume that Shanks had a daughter, and they mention the Figarland family, okay? Which is like, oh, the family line of the Figarland family continues or something like that. So Uta would not be a member of this clan because she's not the biological daughter of Shanks, but the way that they said it implies Shanks is a member of that clan, all right? So the idea is perhaps, you know, yes, he was born on God Valley to a family of Celestial Dragons, and it is the Figarland family that, you know, he is part of, okay? So if Shanks is the descendant of a Celestial Dragon, that would make this attack a lot more poetic. If Shanks, for example, were to use Kamusari against a member of, like, the Tenryubito, like, slicing them in half. There you go. Okay. Well, anyway, I've definitely gone over the timeline so far, so I failed. I'm sorry, because we still have to do snake facts, and so we'll just move on to that. But anyway, yeah, that was Kamusari, very devastating attack, and that's not even probably the strongest one in Shanks' arsenal. Not even close. And God help you if he uses two hands on it, of course. Anyway, now we go over to snake facts. Take it away. All right, so I was just curious if there were any snakes that lived in the Arctic. I know snakes are cold-blooded animals, so it doesn't make much sense for them to live in cold places. But I was just curious, and so I typed in, like, Arctic snakes. And turns out there actually is a species that do live above the Arctic Circle. And it's not like some weird kind of like warm-blooded snake or anything. They're still cold-blooded. It's just that they figured out a way to adapt to living in cold environments. So these are the European adders, and there's a bunch of different species of the adders. But yeah, their range can extend easily up into Scandinavia and Russia. So well above the Arctic Circle. Very impressive. So a couple of adaptations that they have is one of the things is that they will find a warm spot to like bask in the sun, which is not unusual for snakes, but they will actually, you know, go out into like, let's say they find a rock where the sun is beating down. They'll like go out on this rock and then they'll literally like press their body down so they're like turning into a pancake. So the snake has like a pancake mode. And they'll like press their body against the rock as much as possible to increase the surface size of their body to absorb more sunlight. So that's cool. So they have like a pancake mode, okay? Also, a lot of snakes will give birth to their young as eggs, and then the eggs will hatch. Well, in this case, a lot of the adders will actually give birth to their children live, like living, like, you know, they won't be born into like eggs first and then hatch, because the eggs probably wouldn't be able to survive in these kind of cold environments. So they actually give birth to live young, which is unusual for snakes. And then also in this area, even though it is above the Arctic Circle, there are a lot of small mammals like mice and stuff running around in the forest. So it's kind of a race for survival, where after a snake will emerge from winter, they have to pretty much immediately devour a small mammal. But once they do, they're pretty much set for a while to maintain their body heat, okay? So there's like there's an abundance of prey for them to hunt, and then if they can eat like a mouse or a rat or something, then they'll be like, okay, we're good for a while, okay? Even if there's like a cold snap that comes in and just like, oh, because that happens a lot here. I don't even live close to the Arctic Circle, but that'll happen where today it's going to get kind of warm. It's technically spring here, but I've seen snow in March, in April. I've seen snow in May before. My dad, one time when he was out hunting, he said, this was before I was born, but he's like, I saw it snowing in early June once. You know, it's just like, then this is just Pennsylvania, so I can't imagine what it is in like Scandinavia or like Russia or something, right? But the snakes have adapted to that, so yeah, that's the European adder. We learned something today. All right, thanks for watching, everybody. This will be Teching, signing out. I'm going to have this on my arm for a while. Yeah, all right, later, everyone.